All right, sports fans, today we're going to talk about the sexier side of commercial business insurance. And when I say sexy, I mean basic blocking and tackling. Stuff that you should know as a business owner or an advisor to a business owner. So this is Insurance for the Business Owner, episode 1. Whoops. Move this around here. And whoops, scrolling through here. And you can read more about financial poise on slide 40 in the deck. Now, our panelists today are Lee Burke of Burke, Bogart, and Brownell, Adam Serwinski of Sidebar Insurance, Catherine Smith-Dietrich of KSD Law LLC, and Jonathan Mayo of Thornton Powell. And as it was said before, my name is Gary Kirschenbaum. I'm with the Lara Group, and I will be your moderator today. If you're interested and you want to read about our bios, you can do that on slides 33 and 37 of the deck. Neither Financial Poise nor ourselves here today intend to be any kind of an infomercial. So you don't need to listen to me read the bios. Check out the slides. And about the slides. So I will try to call your attention to slides that are relevant to whatever it is that we're talking about, so you can take notes if you like. But don't worry if you're just listening and don't have a screen up. You'll be fine. The slides are not as critical as the conversation. They're meant more as a leave behind. Financial Poise webinars are supported in part by sponsors. The sponsors for this webinar are Sunburst Digital, maker of Type to Learn, the #1 typing app for children ages K through 12. Max Asset. So if you need to conduct an online auction, Max Asset is your turnkey solution. Sunburst and Max Asset are highlighted on slide 4. I'll highlight some of these slides at this point. And also Mood, the nation's premier online retail cannabis dispensary. More on that one on slide 3. The last thing before we begin, slide 5 contains a little disclaimer. Note, you are not our clients and we are not your lawyers. So what we do here today is for your general education and not for you to act on without appropriate advice. And I guess I should add, not just lawyers, but we're also not your property and casualty agents either. And so with that, and without further ado, here we go. All right. Every business owner has at least one contract. Despite paying dearly for them and being bound by them, they don't necessarily always understand them, right? So today, what we're going to do, if I can move my screen around a little bit. Oops. We're going to set up some scenarios so that our panel here can have a lively discussion about insurance and what it means to the business owner. So to lay the foundation for what we're going to be discussing, I think it's important we first identify some of the basic concepts and terms. So let's start with just risk management. And Catherine, if you will start us off today. Switch.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Gary, are you going to read the question or?
Yeah, I will. So the first question we have today is, what is risk management and why does every business need to be aware of it?
Okay, it's a great start-off question. Well, risk management can be looked at a number of different ways, but really it's the process of identifying, analyzing, and protecting against those identified risks. So really having a good view as a business owner, or if you're getting into business, of what lies ahead, what may lie ahead, and trying to protect yourself against those risks. So The first one is identifying. And what I often tell my clients is that they should focus on their critical risks. And two questions are very helpful. One is, what are your major concerns about the business should something occur to that facet of the business? And two, what, if any, significant changes to the business do you intend to make in the immediate future and over the next 3 to 5 years? So those are two real good opening questions to think about when you're trying to identify the critical risks. The next part is analyzing. And for instance, let's say that one of the risk concerns that you thought of was if you're in a manufacturing business and the manufacturing facility was damaged for whatever reason, it couldn't continue to produce. So you would want to know, how would that impact your company? And that's going to be a determination for you and within the particular company to make. For instance, bottom line, employees, customers, market share, reputation, production schedule. So those are all things that you might consider depending on the risk. And then finally, protect. What needs to be done to best protect the company should something, whatever your critical risk, like the manufacturing facility going down, ever occur? And there's all types of ways which we will get into, but things like insurance, what type, what amount, contractual transfer of risk, indemnity, liability caps, capital retention, backup plans. For instance, do you need to lease a separate manufacturing facility ahead of time in case? Disaster chain of command, disaster protocol, critical document location, and the process to get all this done. So that's a good outline of things to follow and kind of discussing what the overview is.
Got it. Okay. And that was a lot of information all at once. Thank you. And we'll dive into some of that. And I think of the things that you mentioned, one of the first things we can talk about, let's talk about loss exposure and what is it, how is it measured, and then what are the different types of losses as they would be categorized, say, as first party or third party. So that was a lot of questions, but Adam, I know you and I talked about this prior to all this. You want to dive into some of that?
Yeah, I think that obviously Catherine did a great job of kind of laying out for us the different types of loss exposures that are there. Does the business have property? Do they have employees? What tools and machines do they use to operate and deliver services? If those services go wrong, how do we manage and kind of handle those exposures? And obviously, one of the things we're talking about today is insurance. And so through the lens of insurance, these kind of fail points, if you will, or risks that kind of face the business come in kind of two fashions or are addressed in two fashions. And those are first party losses and third party losses. And this may give people kind of the shakes to think back to fifth grade English class, but that's really where these kind of titles come from. First party losses are like the I, me, and we of sentences. Our business takes a loss or is injured in some way, and we need to recover because our clients aren't going to pay us for the work that we did, or something happened to our firm and we have nowhere else to go. The firm reaches out, or the business reaches out to the insurance and recovers a direct payment from that insurance. That's considered a first party loss. A third party loss is when people, them, they, their, people outside of the organization are making claims against the business. So you're sued because someone tripped over a hose at a work site that wasn't taped down, or there's a car accident and now the business is being is some third party suing from the injuries. So when we look at the loss exposures, we talk about the things that Catherine brought up so brilliantly, and then we kind of can bucket them into one of two categories when it comes to insurance. Are these a first party loss where really we have to kind of take it on the chin and we can offload some of that risk onto insurance? And then third party is the outside world impacted in such a way where they're going to want money to repay us, and we can again offload that risk onto an insurance carrier.
Got it. Good explanation. In terms of measuring loss, can you talk a little bit about how it's quantified?
So it's a great question. It depends specifically about what type of loss that is. So if you're measuring your loss, for instance, If we're running trucks all the time and they're larger trucks, that's going to have a bigger impact. You may want to have you may want to put a larger lens on that, or a larger coverage amount. If it's regards to your business interruption, if a fire in a factory is going to shut you down and you have that would lead for a long period of time for your business to be losing revenue, obviously you want to look at the limits to kind of measure those. You kind of have to work with a professional in order to determine what those risks are and how those could play out by obviously your knowledge and expertise of your business, but also their knowledge and expertise in the marketplace when it comes to insurance and finding the best carrier for that type of risk.
Got it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too later on here. Right. So that's a lot about risk management. There's another concept under the big umbrella of insurance and risk management called risk control. Lee, would you please address the difference here, what risk control is?
Glad to. Gary, I'd consider any definition of risk control basically to be any activity that you undertake to reduce the likelihood, the frequency, or the severity of an event that could result in injury, property damage, or any other negative impact on a business, its customers, or its employees. So effectively, anything bad happening and who it's going to affect. The first step in risk control is identifying the risk and objectively evaluating the potential of the risk and the impact it may cause. And that may seem pretty simple, but as humans, we don't like to address negative things. We don't like to deal with risk. We don't like to think about it. We don't like to talk about it or plan for it. But in risk management, we have to do it. We have to look at both the frequency of something happening, the severity of something happening, and how to deal with that. Take weather events. I'm here in South Florida. You all are in the Midwest. We have hurricanes. You have tornadoes. Well, the chances of getting hit by a tornado or hurricane in any given year is pretty small. But if it happens, it can be pretty severe. There may not be anything left. So, we have to think about those bad things happening and think about the steps, the risk control steps that we can take to mitigate the losses, the damage, the injuries. And then obviously you factor in cost, you factor in the feasibility of doing things, and try to make the best decisions for your business, your employee, your community, and the people you serve.
Got it. So I don't want to oversimplify this, but I want to give the audience a sort of an understanding of the difference between risk management versus risk control. My takeaway is that risk management is this overarching umbrella that includes insurance, of course, whereas risk control is more about the things that you do with your business to mitigate your exposures, mitigate your risk, aside from insurance.
Well, risk control is part of the risk management process, and risk control goes hand in hand with insurance companies or with insurance. If you're buying insurance, your insurance company is going to look for most businesses to have some basic risk control procedures in place. They're going to want you to be monitoring and managing risk and trying to prevent it or minimize it. And that will help you secure insurance and get better premiums. So, risk management is a half dozen or more different disciplines of risk, of which risk control is just one of them.
Got it. I'm going to jump into some hypotheticals. Before I do, anybody from the panel have anything to add to what we've been discussing? Anything we may have overlooked or missed?
Well, just to jump in, Gary, and kind of echo Lee's sentiment, I think it's important to remember, just because we buy car insurance doesn't mean we stop using our blinker. It's important for businesses to kind of look out for themselves and understand that insurance is the one product you buy and hope you never have to use because something really bad has occurred. So to echo Lee and your points of driving home, risk control is, I think, part of every business owner's obligation. That simply offloading onto insurance is not really a great plan. If we're walking on a tightrope, we prefer not to use the net, but we're glad it's there. And loss control is just our way of getting ahead and setting processes to hopefully have to avoid ultimately using our deductible or paying our deductible or using our policy.
Well said. All right, so let's jump into a hypothetical. So Andrew and Brad are going to be our two proxies here today. Andrew and Brad just formed a corporation called Z Corp. And for now, it's just the two of them as a tech startup. And as prudent businessmen, they want to create a risk management plan, like we were just discussing for this new corporation. How do they go about doing this? Jonathan, will you start us off with this?
Sure. So I would say first step is to contact an independent insurance agent. They're going to be able to go through and kind of walk through the whole process that's been laid out. Catherine really laid it out very well in the beginning, and ask the appropriate questions about the business, find out exactly what their operations are, what type of client are you handling, or what services are you providing, and then from there kind of figure out what the risks are. It sounds like, it's just these two individuals starting up a company, so there's no employees, but so the risk is a little bit different than, say, if they had 5 employees, 10 employees, 100 employees. That changes things as you have more people in the business. There would be more needs for risk management and as well as insurance policies too. But seeing that it's a business, or the business is a tech startup, there'd probably be needs for technology, errors and omissions coverage, maybe data breach coverage for some of those first party losses and third party losses that may be affecting that type of business. One of my questions would be, do you have vehicles? Do you own property? What type of property? Is it contents? Do you own the building? Do you have a lease? We need to see a copy of the lease, things like that. So that way we know that what you're obligated for as well. So that kind of, I think, plays into the overall conversation that I would be having with two people starting up a business, no employees, kind of this scenario. And then also too, I think what I'd try to do is kind of ask them to, once again, piggyback off of what Catherine was saying. What are your plans for the next 2, 3, 5 years? Are you going to be expanding? Are you going to be opening new locations, bringing on other employees? How fast do you expect to grow in revenue? Things like that. So that way we can kind of put some things on the radar that may not be necessary right now, but may be necessary down the road, and at least you'll be aware of them.
Got it. So let's jump down the road a little bit. So Andrew and Brad have had some success with the business. They've got some basic coverages in place, as Jonathan was talking about. Fairly simple in the beginning, 2 guys in a startup, but now they've got 10 employees. So Adam, now that they've grown a little, they've added some employees. Does the plan change?
Yeah, absolutely. The plan changed, right? Each of these 10 employees is obviously hopefully growing and even further expanding the business, helping service clients and customers. But the downside is they also serve as potential exposures to the business, right? So there's obviously a benefit to the growth, but a risk inherent to it. So we would likely have to involve a workers' compensation policy that would cover those workers for any at-work injuries that they suffer. You'd like to consider employee, you might provide the employees with benefits. Well, if you provide employees with benefits and there's a missed payment to their health insurance or to their 401k match, and that mistake is made, you can have an employee benefits liability coverage. If an employee feels discriminated against or alleges that, you could have an employee practices liability claim. And again, these aren't meant to make people's you guys sweaty or worried about why are we doing this? Let's just go home. The reality is that with awesome opportunity of being a business owner, there's some obligation to it. And so these type of policies, whether it be general liability policies, which I think would be prudent as well and part of the program, they're important parts of making sure that you as a business owner can kind of get through some choppy waters if that happens. And with 10 employees, unfortunately, it just means there might be more waves on the water that you have to navigate.
Yep. Okay. All right. So, and so Jonathan and then Adam, you've kind of both illustrated sort of the starting point, some of the call them growing pains of insurance as the company grows. Let's jump one more level up. So Z Corp's now producing their own goods. They're manufacturing their stuff. And they've even got a couple of joint ventures going with some friendly competitors in their space. So, Catherine, how does the risk management plan change now? Now they're a big company and they got a lot going on and there's a bunch of moving parts here. What changed?
Yeah, a lot changes in this growth. So there's two real major categories of risk that have been created. One is they now have a joint venture arrangement, which is a company, an entity in and of itself, separate from each of the 2 or 3 companies that have gotten together to do that. So the joint venture is its own entity in and of itself and has to be looked at. And they're now manufacturing and selling a product. Which brings a lot of different risks and great opportunities as well. So the first one, the joint venture as a separate entity, should have its own risk management plan. It should be implemented for that joint venture. And I want to talk just a bit about the joint venture agreement, because these things should be carefully thought out, put in writing. Things like the parties' responsibilities. So if there's company A and B and they're going to do a JV, a joint venture, then what is each company's responsibilities? What are their financial contributions to the JV? What are their tech contributions or employee contributions? Is there a start and end date? If they decide to stop, what valuation methodology are they going to use in case one of the members wants to buy the rest of the company from the other one who wants out? So all those things create something that should really be considered. And I say that in part because they are wonderful vehicles, but the more you can think of ahead of time, which is what we've all been talking about, the better you are prepared you are should something shift in all those relationships. So that's the first risk, is to get that battened down carefully and then to create a separate risk management plan for the JV. Then the second one is, of course, if they're going to manufacture and sell a product, this creates risk in several new areas. And I would say the major ones are liability, property, and the business financial. So, liability, as I think Lee spoke about, concerns the risk that the company will be sued for damage caused by the product. And so this requires consideration of the likelihood that will happen, the amount of the damage, reputational risks, and then how to handle that. Insurance is one of the major ways companies handle that kind of risk. Do you need excess insurance over that, just in case? And I've seen so many situations where typically, and these gentlemen can tell you better than I am, as they are in the brokerage business, and I'm on the legal side, that often excess policies are worth their weight in gold, and they typically don't cost that much. But those kind of things should be considered. Also, can you shift, if you can't get everything shifted to insurance, can you shift it by contract? Can you enter into agreements with your customers who are buying it that say we don't warrant X and Y, we shift the liability? So there's all sorts of different mechanisms in addition to insurance, which is one of the critical pieces here to shift the liability. Property insurance. Go ahead.
That was, well, for the benefit of our viewer, you said excess insurance. Would that be the same as umbrella?
No, I would say no, but it's similar. Yes. So umbrella covers a wider swath, usually covers a couple different things, and umbrella often will drop down. So let's say your liability policy provided by company A excludes coverage, won't cover you. You can potentially get coverage from the umbrella policy. They may drop down to pick that up. Or if the company A insurer goes bankrupt, the umbrella might drop down. An excess insurer will only come on top of that first insurance and only comes into play once the first insurance is used.
Okay, thank you for that. So
Yeah.
I want to come back. All right, so again, a whole lot about insurance, and I don't. It sounds awfully expensive. That's all I'm thinking right now. You guys collectively have listed a whole bunch of different insurances, and as the company is growing here, the number of insurances and the size or the amount of coverage continues to grow, which tells me my premiums are growing as a business owner. So Lee, I'm going to come back to you here. Um, they're into this pretty deep now. They're manufacturing product. They've got joint ventures, et cetera. How do they go about financing all this protection? Like, what are some of their options to make it efficient?
Well, insurance is one, but insurance as a rule is not an inexpensive way of transferring risk. Um, you you generally want to try to deal with your risk issues internally, um, through safety programs, through loss control programs, um, through hiring. I mean, the better you hire and you train, the more you can control and reduce risk issues. Catherine talked about the legal terms, the legal ways of doing it. Every time we sign a contract nowadays, whether it's a lease, whether it's a purchase agreement, whether it's a rental car, you don't want to turn that agreement over and read the fine print on the back of it, because it'll scare you to death. Hertz or Avis, when they're renting you that car, if you read the agreement on the back, you wouldn't want to drive out the parking lot. I mean, basically, you're assuming all of the liability and letting them off the hook. And that's the way the legal world works nowadays. The big companies are trying to contractually shift liability, risk obligations, financial obligations downstream to the little guy. So that's a way that the game is played. So it's not just insurance cost, it's legal cost, it's, again, the cost of hiring and training employees. And you have to look at all of these different things, as a means of protecting your company. And the good side of it is, as the company grows, as you have these joint ventures, as you're manufacturing the products, your profits are hopefully going up, your revenues are going up, your profits are going up. The value of the enterprise is going up. You now have goodwill. You've got a real market value. You've got intangible value to the company, and you want to protect that for your benefit as a stockholder, for your stakeholders in the company if you have partners or stockholders, for the employees. The nice thing about premiums is premiums very seldom exceed revenues. You go out of business pretty quick if that happened. And the same thing with the other costs that you encumber, to try to protect a business. But it is expensive. It is expensive to run a safe business today. There's no way around that. But I'll tell you what, it's a lot more expensive to have claims and go out of business.
Well, so to that point, I know, as a user of insurance, so for instance, with auto or home insurance, it's probably a number of years ago, but I increased my deductibles in order to try and pull down some of my premiums. So I don't know that every business owner knows they have that as an option in their commercial policies. And that would be another way to, in our examples, finance is a loose term here, but finance their premiums by reducing them through higher deductibles. Where would that be an option, and where would it make sense in your opinion?
Well, there's a basic rule in risk management, that you don't insure anything that you can afford to pay for yourself. And that's a good rule, for us as individuals just with insurance. If you can afford to pay for something, don't buy insurance. I call it junk insurance. When you go get a new iPhone, the first thing Apple wants to do is sell you the insurance on the iPhone. When you get a refrigerator, somebody wants to sell you a maintenance warranty on the refrigerator. We can go broke buying, maintenance policies, or, I drop my iPhone policies on things that, we can afford to pay for ourselves and just replace. So whether it's a deductible, whether it's just simply looking at your business and saying, okay, what risks can we afford to pay for ourselves? Keep in mind, when you're buying insurance, you're paying for the overhead of that insurance company. They've got a building, they're paying rent, they're paying employees, they're paying the adjuster to go out and pay the claim, they're paying a legal department to get involved in a claim. So you're paying a lot of somebody else's business expenses when there's an insurance company involved.
Lee, are
And
you
if you
are you
can,
telling me that the insurance companies are making money on us?
you betcha. The old adage that everybody says, they didn't build all those big buildings in downtown Chicago by losing money.
Right, right. All right. Well, so moving into the policies themselves, Lou, we've talked about the different types of insurance that the business has to have, but let's get an understanding for business owners of you know, what actually makes up the policy. So Adam, I'll direct this at you first. I was going to split this one up, but talk a little bit about what does a business owner need to know here?
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, and to echo some of the things that my panelists have been saying, the first thing to understand about insurance policies is like, and I mentioned this before, it's probably you want it to be the last line of defense, right? Not the first. It's not the lead. And insofar as have a set expectations on that, insurance is not a fix-all, right? It is for sudden, unexpected, and accidental injuries that you did your best to attempt to avoid and unfortunately came to you. As far as the insurance policy itself, when you review those policies, it's really important. They're kind of broken down into several portions. The first portion being the declarations page, which generally will outline for you the different levels of coverage that are offered by the policy. These are oftentimes able to be changed based upon your budget or your demand for risk or to offload that risk. So the declarations page is usually on the front. It's followed by the insuring agreement, which is the long, nasty language that no one wants to read. And it talks about what is covered by the policy, what is considered, and it defines terms within that contract in a way that hopefully creates some bright lines for you to understand when something would be covered or when it's not. And then the conditions are the things that contract is based on. That's the third component of the policy. So anything within the policy that they're relying on you to have in place or to maintain or to keep up to date. And then finally, one of the most important parts is things they are not willing to insure for, exclusions. These are oftentimes the most common things to affect businesses and the things they want to try and have you self-insure or make sure or not provide insurance because it's one of those things where you are more commonly going to use. So the exclusions are a super important part to evaluate. So for instance, I'll give you an example. Dealt with a client who left another agency once. This is in the personal lines, but he lived in Chicago and his boat policy excluded Lake Michigan, which is where the boat was 90% of the time. So when you look at the exclusions, it's important to at least breeze over them because if your boat's sitting in Lake Michigan and the boat policy you just bought says we exclude large bodies of water, including but not limited to Lake Michigan, that's not the best policy for you. So these 4 areas are quick things to just review and make sure and talk to your agent about such that you can make sure that what you're buying is going to really work when you need it most.
So it's my experience that most business owners, most executives at companies that might be in charge of the insurance program will look at the declarations page, which of course is at the beginning of the contract. And by the time they get anywhere, even near the middle, they've given up hope of ever reading this 150-page contract. And arguably the most important part are the exclusions. And it's usually the last ones that are tacked on at the very back, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would just highlight one more thing is like, then just treat it like a bad book and just skip to the end and figure out what you wanted to know how it ended anyway. Right. Look at the declarations page, turn it over, and just read the end of the chat book and spoil the ending because the middle, while important when it comes time for claims and everything else, is really probably the part that you can be most comfortable with because it's usually form-based and anything in the exclusions that are added there generally refer to the part of the policy in which they are modifying or changing. And so you can then, if you want to dig deeper, go to that specific page or that specific paragraph. But the exclusions will lead you to the areas the insurance was worried about and probably a space they've had one or several litigated matters about. And so that's why they're adding it to their exclusions form. So like I said, read the deck page, know who feel comfortable with those numbers, then turn the policy over and read the ending to let it kind of, point to you where they're worried about your business. And that'll make you feel more comfortable with the policy.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? I think that understanding the components and just as a business owner, just knowing that every policy is made up of the same components and getting an understanding of how these documents flow can be helpful when you're reviewing them. Anybody else have anything to add to anything about the big print giveth and the small print taketh away?
I mean, the endorsements are critical too, because often they're focusing those endorsements on whatever type of company you are. So, I've had clients who are food brokerages, and there's an endorsement about no coverage if the refrigerated truck stops working. Well, that's a problem because that's a major part of the business. So endorsements often contain or change exclusions and other parts of the policy, but it's good to take a peek at those.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure everybody can attest to having seen a policy where coverage is given and then it's taken away by another page of the contract, then given back again by another page of the contract. It'd be rather confusing for the business owner, right? So talking about all this, we got Andrew and Brad here. So how do they go about selecting the best insurance for Z Corp? Lee, why don't you start with this, and Jonathan, will you chime in as well a little bit, because I think there's different approaches to how you can do this.
My easy answer is they don't go about selecting the best insurance for the business. They stick to the business they know and where they're making money. They find and hire a professional in the insurance business and get out of their way, take their advice and get out of their way when it comes to insurance. As the business owners, they certainly have input and they're going to have a lot of questions and they should get answers. But insurance is very, very complicated. It's a legal contract. It's a legal contract drawn up by, people that are very experienced in drawing up insurance contracts, not giving the store away. And professional expertise is important. The insurance industry is highly competitive, both in terms of product, premium cost, coverage terms, quality of service, and the financial performance of insurance companies. So you want to be getting input from somebody that understands the industry, knows the strengths and weaknesses of different insurance companies, where they're good, where they're not so good, and where you're getting the best value for your money. The analogy on this question that I think about is that, it's easy enough to go out and buy a plane, but you shouldn't try to fly it unless you're a pilot. These guys are running a tech company. They can go buy the insurance, but let the pilot advise them what to get.
Okay. So, Jonathan, jump into a little bit about how they might go about doing that.
So if it were me, if I were, in their shoes, what I would do is try to talk to either other people who are in the same type of profession or same type of business and see who do you use? Are they knowledgeable? Maybe try to, sit down with a couple people, maybe a few different people, and talk to them, interview them as far as insurance agents are concerned. And see who's knowledgeable, see who understands my business, understands my needs, understands what I need to protect my business, and then kind of make a decision from there. I've noticed that a lot of times with startups, I'm sure this is kind of common, and I find it from when I talk to attorneys, this is kind of common. They think that just because you're in insurance, you do everything. Just like somebody says, oh, well, you're an attorney, well, you can handle my divorce. It's not necessarily true. That's not your specialty. So a lot of times people will call up their home and auto agent and they'll say, hey, can you insure my business? Sometimes maybe they can, but it's probably not the best idea because their main focus is insuring homes and autos. They need to, at that point, probably say, you know what, that's not my area. I have somebody who does commercial insurance and can sit down and talk to you about what you need for your business. So what I would try to do is find somebody who's knowledgeable about your business, your risks, your exposures, can have those conversations with you and kind of guide you in the right direction for what you need.
Okay. So, and there's a couple different types of brokers. So Adam, can you just give us an idea so that a business owner would know the difference between a direct agent and an independent agent?
Yeah, so there's basically three types of different agents that are out there. You have the direct agents, which you're speaking directly to employees of the actual carrier that's ultimately delivering. These are generally call centers or specific carrier sites that are made for one particular carrier. Then you have another agent called a captive agent. Those agents are independent from the greater carrier, but often have storefronts that are branded in a carrier's name. Many of whom you may see regularly or hear from regularly on TV and radio. And then lastly, you have independent brokers. And independent brokers aren't necessarily affiliated with one particular carrier. They generally have multiple options in multiple kind of areas or commercial, personal lines, life, et cetera, and are able to provide kind of a wider options and opportunities because of their many carrier relationships. Whereas the two prior are usually kept to the single carrier that they are affiliated or hired by.
Got it. So direct, employed by the insurance company, captive, independent, but working for only one insurance company, and then the independent broker who represents many different carriers, other
Absolutely.
than
And that,
captive and direct.
yeah, and then that independent broker may also work with wholesalers or other groups that are higher up in the chain that offer them a wide variety of carriers, particularly in specialty lines. We're getting a little into the weeds here, but just so you understand the kind of terminology, there are layers to that independent space that come sometimes introduce new terms or new brands to the interaction. But just understand that for the most part, it's just the employees, the independent but captive, and then the specific independent agents.
Got it. And so the difference, and this may not be as important to a business owner, but I think it's terms that agents tend to throw around loosely. And like so many things in insurance, there's,
Right.
3, 4 different ways to say the same thing. And an agent may say to a business owner, "Oh, we're not going to go to the retail markets. We're going to go to the wholesale markets." And a business owner who's a wholesaler or a retailer might not be thinking one thing, right? When the agent means something different. So, Jonathan, can you just highlight quickly here, what's the difference between retail and wholesale insurance carriers in this industry?
Absolutely. So, a retail carrier would be, or I guess maybe I'll kind of start with retail agent versus wholesale broker. Retail agent would be somebody like Lee, Adam, Gary, or myself. We work directly with, we're forward facing. We work directly with the insured. And then we also have carriers that we write directly with through our office. We have contracts to work with them. On the wholesale side, the wholesale broker works with the retail agent when one of our retail carriers isn't able to write a policy for whatever reason. Maybe it's that it falls outside their underwriting appetite. It's higher risk. There's been too many claims, things like that. Specialty insurance carriers tend to fall under that wholesale umbrella. So that's typically the difference. One of the other differences that you'll probably notice too is when you go to if say you're buying a wholesale policy, you're going to notice that there's probably going to be something called a surplus lines tax on there, maybe a stamping fee, maybe a wholesale broker fee, things like that, you're probably thinking, well, where is all that money going and what is that for? That is stuff that is required to be collected by either, the state when it comes to the surplus line tax. It's a tax is something that gets collected by the government, obviously. The wholesale broker fee is basically the wholesale broker getting paid for that policy, or it's their cut. So those are all things that kind of fall into play that you wouldn't necessarily see on a retail policy or something from a retail carrier.
Got it. Okay. So, and so for the business owner, while there's certainly a difference and arguably a cost difference, it should be a seamless process.
Correct. Yeah, it should be there shouldn't be any difference in the process. There might be a couple more applications to sign than normal. Usually a wholesale broker or a surplus lines policy, there's a couple extra applications that need to be signed, but that shouldn't be a big deal. But the process itself should remain seamless. You're still working with the retail agent or retail broker. You're not having to deal with the wholesale broker or anything like that. So
Okay.
um, and two, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that the policy is any better or worse. In some instances, it's a better fit for
Right.
business because they are specializing in whatever the risk is. So
Got it. All right. So now Z Corp here has a policy. They've got a program. Catherine, what's the responsibility of the insurer, the carrier?
So there are different responsibilities for the insurer and then the insured, but I do want to point out that both the insurer and the insured, before we get into their separate responsibilities, have a duty of good faith and fair dealing toward one another. And that essentially means that they must be accurate and honest in their representations and information to each other. And so that's important. And many states have enacted bad faith or claim handling statutes that obligate the insurer primarily to do certain things in response to a claim by the insured in a timely fashion. And some states have penalties that can be as high as 2 times the covered amount, plus attorney's fees and costs. So that's a really important duty they both share. I just wanted to quickly point that
Yeah,
out.
I think that's fair.
The
Would it be fair to say that a business owner should treat their insurance companies as partners in the business?
Yes, yes. I mean,
Okay.
if they're asked a question, they need to respond, accurately. It's very important process, yes. And the insurer's certain separate obligations are they must timely provide the full and complete policy to the insured, and your brokers will often help you get that done. And then if there's a liability claim, like the company is sued because the product exploded or something, the insurer then has a duty to defend and indemnify the insured, which means the insurer has to hire defense counsel to defend the insured and pay for any covered claims. But if the insurer believes that some of the claim may not be covered, then it has a responsibility to set its position out in something called a reservation of rights letter that goes to the insured. And often, if the insurer fails to do that, it can waive, meaning lose, its right to rely on those positions. So those are important things for a liability claim. Same kind of thing for a property claim. If your building explodes and you send it to the insurer has to timely investigate. They have to pay the insured any undisputed amounts, meaning like if you say, well, the value to rebuild the building is going to be 10 million, and the insurance company says, we think it's only 5 million, they have an obligation to pay that 5 million to you at that time while you can continue to argue about the rest. Same thing, their positions need to be in writing with backup as to why they paid you the amount. So there's a lot of responsibility on the part of the insurer.
What about the insured?
Yeah, their first responsibility, and it's funny because you were talking about how boring it might be to do, but it is to read the policy. So as boring as that is, that's often said, the insured can't say, I didn't know it wasn't in there. I didn't notice this. It is the responsibility to read through the policy and bring to the attention of the broker or the insurer anything you thought was in there that isn't, or ask your broker about that. The insured has to provide prompt notice of any claim to the insurer. And this is really important, whether it's a liability claim or a property claim. Prompt notice is critical. If you don't do that, in some states, you will lose all rights you might have had under the policy. So that's really
Okay.
critical. And importantly, in most policies, this doesn't mean telling your broker. This means telling the insurer. You can tell your broker, you should tell your broker. I would encourage that. But simultaneously, you should also notify in writing your insurer, because that's the contract is between the insurer and the insured. So that's critical.
Well said.
Yeah, and then if it's a liability claim, you have to provide copies of the litigation or any written notice of a claim to the insurer. And again, if it's property damage, you've got to gather all information and provide it to them. I really recommend getting a dialogue going with the insurer and asking them what they need from you to support the claim. And again, all of this should be in writing. It helps both of the parties.
Got it. So, thank you for all that. Now we've got these policies. Our Z Corp has this whole set of policies. They've grown. They've got all these different lines of insurance. Lee, I think it was you that mentioned earlier. I don't think you said it by name. I think you said it in concept of additional insured. And there's other aspects of being named to a policy. Can you address those and what they mean? I think those can also be confusing to a business owner, whether they're the first insured, additional insured, named insured, etc.
Sure, happy to. But before I do that, I'd like to add one thing. Catherine just gave a great explanation on a lot of the different responsibilities of the insurance company and the policyholder. But I'd like to add one thing that we see lots of times dealing with clients, and that is what the insurance company will call a material change in risk. If there's something that happens in the, at the insured's location, whether it be a business or at a residence, during the course of a year that materially changes the underlying risk profile, please let the insurance agent or broker in the insurance company know. Give you a simple example. Somebody buys a single family residence and uses it as a rental property of an annual lease. They tell the broker, the insurance company insures it fine. The next year they decide they're going to change it to an Airbnb, but they don't tell anybody.
Right.
The following year they decide, gee, rather than an Airbnb and leasing the whole place out for a week, we'll go to a pad share, or a weekly. We'll rent rooms in the house on a weekly basis. And there are programs out there that do that. There are leasing programs that do that. And meanwhile, nobody's told the insurance company. And now basically the client's running a motel.
Transparency is
injured,
important.
yeah, they're not going to get a claim paid. So, very, very important issue. But going to the, back to the definitions again that, Catherine was talking about before, the first insured, which is the first name on the policy. The analogy I'd like to use is they're the driver of the bus. Think about a bus driving down the highway. That first name on the policy is the driver of the bus. They have all of the rights of determining where that bus goes, where it stops, how fast they go. They're the only person the insurance company has an obligation to communicate with. That's the entity, that first person or the company has the right to make changes to the policy, get a return premium, the obligation to pay the premium, etc. They're the driver of the bus. The policy is also going to list a wide variety of insureds that are covered by the policy. Typically, it will be owners, officers, directors of a company, maybe board members. Very often, it will be employees, and typically, or maybe by an endorsement. But you want your employees normally to be insured under the policy. The business gets sued, you want to extend coverage to the employees, and others can be insured under the policy. They get most of the policy benefits, but they really don't have any of the policy rights. They don't get to make any choices or decisions. And then lastly, you've got an additional insured. Now, instead of the bus and being a passenger on the bus, you've got a cargo trailer on the back of the bus. And basically somebody or an entity that's an additional insured gets some of the coverages offered under the policy, but they are at the end of the bus and they're only going to get coverage, particularly in a liability situation, if the coverage on the policy has not been exhausted, through a lawsuit or through other claims. So they do have that the additional insured has some coverage, but it is not anywhere near as good as the named insured or an insured under the policy who come first.
Got it. So Adam, what would be a good example where a business owner might want to get that status as on somebody else's policy? I want to be
Yeah,
an
great.
additional insured on a supplier or a customer's policy, for instance. What does that look like?
Yeah, this is a great question we deal with a lot of the time. Additional insured is oftentimes where we're going to see landlords, right? We're going to see people who have been, if you're renting or if you are renting out a portion of your office or sharing office space, a lot of times we're seeing, particularly since COVID, a lot of office share situations where other business is coming into your office and using your space, where if their employees did something that led to an injury on your rented or owned property, you would want additional insured status so that that liability claim wouldn't fall on your insurance, but would be handled by the subtenant or tenant's policy itself. But oftentimes, if you are renting from others, you will oftentimes hear of property managers for a site or the property owners of a site requiring additional insured status under your business's policy. There's also, you may see mortgagees or other lending institutions that will require additional insured status or loss payee status, such that if they're lending you money for operating capital and it's based upon or supports your Xerox machine or your office equipment or whatever it might be, that note was sometimes secured against your own business's insurance, and they'll want to be listed as what for intents and purposes is like an additional insured, but for the property component, it's called a loss payee. And it just means that if you got a check for a fire that happened in your office for all the property that was damaged, they would be listed alongside of you as a payee for those, so that they knew and could collect against their loan money against, so that they can continue making or you can continue making payments, or they could collect against it to recoup the outstanding balance.
Got it. We only have a couple minutes left here. We can go on for a lot longer, but we're short on time. Does anybody have any additional comments they want to add before we sign off?
So I'll add one just really quickly to follow up on something Catherine talked about with regards to policies. So the duty to notify is oftentimes where we find a lot of problems with year-to-year renewals in particular. So for instance, if you were to be notified of a mistake you made in some work order or a product that you delivered to a client or a service you provided to a client, and you had a policy such as an errors and omissions policy or a cyber liability policy that could presumably cover whatever the risk is that you found. If you fail at the time of renewal to notify those type of carriers, they can rescind the policy, that new policy you buy altogether. And so it's super important in those instances that you're very transparent with the carrier about the potential risks that are or losses that are out there, but also that you're particularly transparent with your business partners or colleagues, such that you don't enter a renewal period where with notice, for lack of a better term, of a potential loss, and then the new policy starts and you haven't notified them. It can damage coverage not just for the person who knew and didn't tell anybody, it can damage coverage for the entire business altogether. And so it's super important on that duty to notify that we be very transparent about it and notify carriers, particularly on those type of policies, where we might want to try and negotiate it away. Like our initial action is like, I'll just take care of it ourselves. Failure to notify the carrier can have a very substantial impact on future claims or future eligibility for coverage. And it's super important. And then one more item.
Oh, go ahead.
And then one more item is just to remember, the sooner you get insurance, the more cost effective it is. One factor in rating for most business insurance policies is revenue. And so if your business is smaller when you start the policy, the policy will actually be more cost effective for you.
Right.
And so if you grab that 4 or 5 years down the line when you're a $5 million business and not when you're a $100,000 business, that policy is that much more expensive as time goes on. So time is of the essence in these policies.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. All right. So, and we are out of time, and that concludes our webinar. I want to thank you very much, Catherine, Lee, Jonathan, and Adam, for joining us. Thank you, listeners, for being out there, and for joining us for another entertaining yet educational production of Financial Poise. Please look for Financial Poise webinars wherever better continuing education webinars are sold. Thank you very much.